Carnell.
Hi, Carnell Switzky. I'm Executive Director with Folk Music Canada. We're proudly co-presenting this webinar today, or this session, I should say, today at the Folk Music Ontario Conference. I just wanted to say I'm actually here in Toronto, and that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Just like Joel mentioned, today being the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I think it's really valuable just to acknowledge how great it is that Canada is moving forward with this day that's been long overdue. A great chance to recognize and commemorate the intergenerational harm that residential schools have caused to Indigenous families and communities, and to honor those who have been affected by this injustice. So today we're going to hear from Dave Landreth from the Bros. Landreth is his band. He was the brainchild, or one of the brainchilds behind Birthday Cake Media. And he's going to be talking to you about the river of nickels that is available to artists. So I'll hand it over to Dave.
All right. Thanks, Carnell, and thanks, Joel. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm going to launch into this presentation in a sec, but I did want to encourage anybody. I've got the chat window up in front of me. So as I'm going through, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And I would totally appreciate the interaction as we go along. So yeah, don't be shy. We probably won't have to wait till the end to get to them, but yeah, feel free to jump right in with any questions you might have. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. There we go. Chat. Okay. We're going to talk about royalties, revenue, and record labels. And I've cheekily titled this presentation A River of Nickels because often that is kind of what it feels like. We're going to chat about setting yourself up to be in a position to collect all those different revenue streams. Sometimes they can be pretty minuscule, but it's about making sure that you know where they are and that you're prepared to grab them when they show up. So, hello, I'm Dave. I use he, him pronouns. I am currently sitting here in Winnipeg, which is in Treaty 1. Here we are the home to the Anishinaabeg people, the Cree, OG Cree, and Dene peoples. Also the home of the Métis peoples, as well as there's a thriving and vibrant community of Inuit people that live here as well. So I play the bass in a band called the Brothers Landreth, and that was kind of all I ever wanted to do. And we've been doing that for about 10 years, my brother and I. And in 2018, we were faced with a bit of a dilemma. We wanted to release our music. We were working on our second record, and we were looking at a pile of label offers that were feeling rather uninspiring. And from that, we decided that we wanted to potentially look at options for ourselves that might put us in a better position. So we dreamed up this idea of becoming our own record label, but not necessarily a record label to the public, just setting ourselves up in a position so that we could put out our music in a way that felt, like we were driving all of the different areas for the business. And in the process of doing that, we accidentally started a record label that we eventually called Birthday Cake. We set ourselves up with a distribution deal through The Orchard, which is Sony's independent distribution network. And once we got the Bros record up and running, we realized that we were in a position to support some of the other artists in our community. And from there, we were able to put out records by Begonia. We were able to put out Joey's solo record. We worked with the Biga Tanyas. We've worked with Carnell's band, The Fretless, Field Guide, Leith Ross, and many, many more. So today I wanted to chat with you about royalties and revenue, specifically from the perspective of a record label or potentially an independent artist that is self-releasing. Before we get too far into it, it would be really helpful for me to know where you folks are coming from. So if you could drop into the chat, let me know. Are you an artist? Are you currently working with a record label? Are you a record label? Maybe just give me an idea of where you're coming from today, and that might actually help me direct some of this conversation, and I'll have a better idea of sort of what things to talk about. So why don't you take a minute and just yeah, let me know what it is that you do. All right, Sarah. Fantastic. So we've got a couple of folks that are looking at potentially becoming their own record labels. That's great. Mike, maybe you'll be here to fact check me. That'll be helpful. Russell's in a couple of different indie bands. Fantastic. Okay, well, that gives me a bit of perspective. That's very helpful. Feel free to keep dropping them in there. One big important caveat is I am not an expert, by no means. Most of the information that I'm going to share here today is been from my anecdotal experience of fumbling my way through accidentally starting a record label. I have leaned pretty heavily on a bunch of different resources that I think are available to most folks. The first and most important being trial and error. Maybe second to that is a good Google search. Another one that I would recommend highly to anybody who's interested in maybe geeking out a little bit on the music business is a book called Everything You Need to Know About the Music Business, or All You Need to Know About the Music Business. It's by a guy named Donald Passman. He's an American entertainment lawyer, and it's become kind of a Bible for us over at Birthday Cake. Everybody that we hire gets one on their first day. And it's a bit of a dry read, but it is incredibly helpful and gives you a really nice overview of essentially the whole music business, which is really helpful. I've also picked up a lot of stuff by attending webinars and workshops and conferences just like this one. So I'm hoping that I can hopefully add some clarity to your lives and some of the questions that you might have. And lastly, I've got a really nice network of mentors and peers that I can lean on when I'm really stuck. So I sort of give you that context so that you can encourage you to do the same with your folks and Google lots, get Donald Passman's book. Okay, so the way I approach royalties and revenue for our company is that I think about royalties and revenues as taps, and I think about collecting them as dropping buckets underneath those taps. So my strategy has always been identify various different revenue streams and then make sure that I've got a bucket sitting under them so that when things start to go well for any artist, we're there and we're ready to collect on those revenue streams. Okay, so an important question: what is a record label? Well, a record label is a company that coordinates the production, manufacturing, distribution, marketing and promotion, and enforcement of copyright for sound recordings and music videos. In reality, record labels can look wildly different from tiny little outfits like ours, where we're a small office full of people, or massive labels that take over, skyscrapers in New York. It varies everywhere in between, but in general, that's kind of the gig. So we are facilitating, putting out the music, trying to get it into new ears, and then trying to monetize it and collect on those copyrights. Put simply, we make money through investing in the copyright of sound recordings and then exploiting those rights to earn royalties. So what is a copyright? A copyright is the exclusive legal right given to an originator or an assignee to print, publish, perform, film, or record literary, artistic, or musical material, and to authorize others to do the same. That's a bit of a, potentially a bit of a confusing description, but that really is the business of labels, is we own or have the license to exploit those two different things. It's worth mentioning that there's a bit of a difference between assigning and licensing a copyright. Effectively, to assign a copyright is to pass over the ownership of it. So when an artist assigns a copyright to a label, they are effectively saying, here, this is yours now, in exchange for whatever terms you have in a record deal. And licensing it is a way of entrusting a label to release that and work on that while the artist still maintains an interest in it. So typically it's for a shorter term, and then the rights revert back to the artist. And is a little, these days seems to be a little more common. A full assignment is a little less likely, or a little less common. I think this applies to most folks here, as it seems. A lot of, yeah, everybody in the chat seems to be coming from this stream, but no record label, no problem. You're your own record label, excuse me. So technically, if you don't work with a record label, you are a record label. And lucky you, you get to take on all the jobs and the responsibilities of that label. Congratulations. But the big payoff there means that you get to keep the whole pie. So you get to keep all the revenue and you don't have to share it with anybody. So it's a bit of a trade-off. But I'd say that these days it's way more common for people to be releasing their own music. As you all know, we live in this DIY age. It's never been easier. It's never been more acceptable. So let's talk about how to make sure that you're going to make all, or scoop all the dough that is available to you. All right. Record labels are rights holders. And there are essentially two types of music rights that you might want to familiarize yourself with. Some of you will be more familiar with likely the compositional copyright, which is the songwriter's copyright, which SOCAN collects for you. But what we're mostly interested in is the master and sound recording. And this is the copyright that labels get to exploit and make dough off of. I like this definition of it I found online. A master sound recording is an expression of a composition owned by artists and their record labels. So once we record something and we now have that sound recording, as an artist, you own the copyright in that sound recording, and you can either license that or assign that to a label, or you can represent it yourself, acting as your own label. I will talk a little bit about the composition side. Even though labels don't generally participate on the composition side, it's worth mentioning so that we have some context for some of the other things we're going to end up talking about, because they do live adjacent to one another. So the composition is controlled by the songwriters and the publishers, and that's the copyright for the harmony, melody, and lyrics that make up what we typically call a song. So that is the copyright that belongs to songwriters. It's collected by SOCAN. I think most folks are generally are aware of this copyright. But yeah, again, this is not something that labels, unless a label has also signed the publishing to an album or to an artist. But that's kind of a different story. And for today, we're just going to focus on the sound recording. Leads me to my next question. We understand what rights are. We understand roughly the sort of definition and responsibilities of a record label. But what is a royalty? A royalty is a compensatory payment received by rights holders. So that's getting paid for owning copyright or licensing and exploiting copyright. As I sat here and tried to wrap my brain around how I would talk about all these different things, I was able to sort of break it up into what I see as effectively 7 different types of royalties that drive revenue for record labels. Again, a few of these are ones that we don't actually participate in as a record label, but I think they're worth understanding so that you have some context for the whole picture. Let's start with an easy one, relatively easy. As a record label, you will be due royalties for downloads and physical sales. This one is fairly straight ahead. If somebody downloads a track off of your album or downloads the whole album, you get paid. You set the price for that. That's typically, about a buck for a track, and you can set the price anywhere from a couple of bucks to 15 or 20 bucks for the album. And similar on the physical side, if somebody buys a CD, you get paid. So that's pretty straightforward. Streaming royalties, not so straightforward. DSPs are the digital service providers. Those are folks like Spotify and Apple, Google, Amazon, Deezer, etc. Sometimes we call them retailers as well, but those are the platforms that host your music and stream it. And the way you get paid is that the DSPs negotiate a percentage of their revenue that they have to pay to artists and labels. Now, there's a bit of a misconception that labels or streams, are paid as a flat rate, and you might hear people say it's roughly 0.4 of a cent per stream, or it's 0.5 cents per stream, and that's not actually accurate. It might be helpful for ballparking the income, but the way it works is that let me see, I wrote this down. The DSPs negotiate global payout rates with content owners. Currently, it's sitting somewhere around 50% of their revenue. And that revenue pool is split between all the right holders on the platform. So everybody who has music on there can get a piece of that. But the rights holder share is determined by the number of streams the artist has on a platform divided by all of the streams on the platform. So effectively, the more market share you take up on the DSP, the more you're going to get in terms of streams. So to say that it's a flat rate per stream is simplifying it a little too much, especially considering that from DSP to DSP and from country to country, those rates are going to change pretty drastically. So streaming rates in different countries pay out higher depending where you are. So yeah, so it's a little more complicated. Let's get into neighboring rights. This is, I think, somewhere that I would spend a little bit more time on. I think it's not widely understood very well. It's a little complicated, but it can be a tremendous income stream for Canadian artists, and we'll get into why. But neighboring rights is a royalty generated by terrestrial, web, satellite radio, terrestrial, web, and satellite radio airplay, as well as business background use in television broadcasting. Neighboring rights are paid to record labels, but they're also paid to the featured performers on those recordings. We call them neighboring rights because from a legal standpoint, they sit beside performance rights, which are the songwriter rights. We'll talk about those in a minute. Where it gets complicated is that neighboring rights look very different from country to country. So in 1961, a bunch of countries got together and they took part in something called the Rome Convention that set some standards for how they were going to collect copyright. And at the time, the US didn't join the Rome Convention. So despite the fact that most of the world operates one way, they do it very differently, and it creates some interesting sort of hiccups in how you want to position yourself to collect these rights. The biggest difference between the way the US do it and the way that most of the other countries do it is that the US does not pay neighboring rights for terrestrial radio, which can be a kind of a big blow. There's a big piece of income missing there. And because of that, not all countries play nice with the US when it comes to reciprocal royalties. I guess like it's kind of solidarity. It's kind of like turning their nose up to the US for not joining the Rome Convention, but something that we need to be aware of. And we'll get into that in a second. I think we'll come back to this at the end, and I'll talk about some suggestions I have for how you can set yourself up to be really efficient about collecting these neighboring rights. And then this disparity between the US and Canada will become a little more relevant. One thing that I did want to talk about while we're sitting and thinking about neighboring rights is that there's a fair bit of controversy about the way that neighboring rights are paid out to artists. And I'll try and do this without potentially taking, I'll try and be unbiased about it. I have some pretty heavy opinions, but I'll just sort of present it as it is. But with the understanding that a neighboring right is effectively split between the performers who are actually playing on the recording and the master owners. Labels traditionally have taken the standpoint, or have taken the stance, that the master owner royalty is just for the record labels because the artist, oh, hi, Rain. Rain just popped in the chat, fellow Winnipegger. Labels keep the master side because they've taken the stance that the artist keeps the featured performer side. So they've got their split, the labels have their split, nice and tidy. It doesn't go into the pool of royalties for your record deal. It's very rare to see a record label that lets artists participate in the master owner side of the neighboring right. I don't agree with that sentiment. It is industry standard, but just because it's industry standard doesn't mean that it's fair and doesn't mean that it's ethical. I said I was going to be unbiased about this. I suppose I'm not. I'm very biased. I actually have very strong opinions about this. Never mind. I'm just going to give it to you straight. I think that artists should participate in all streams, all revenue streams that have anything to do with their master recordings. And so I think they should participate in the master side of the neighboring rights. There was kind of a landmark case. Childish Gambino sued Glassnote in the some late 2000s, early 2010s, because Glassnote was not including the master owner side of neighboring rights, which would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, in his label statements. They settled out of court, which I can only assume means that the label capitulated and gave out a big payment. But it's definitely controversial. So when you are acting as your own record label, you're in a really great position because you get to keep both sides of that pie. And as we'll get into later, this can be really lucrative for Canadian artists, especially. And that has a lot to do with commercial radio as well as the satellite radio. Before we go too far, does anybody have any questions? I want to be careful not to ramble too far on with this sort of technical mumbo jumbo. So maybe we'll just take a little break for Tim Hortons here, and you can hit me up with any questions in the chat. Very good. Okay, so that's neighboring rights. Another great royalty stream for labels is sync licensing. What is sync licensing? Well, anytime somebody wants to synchronize your music to a video, that's where the sync part comes in. They have to get a specific license. They have to get permission from you to do that. It's not a compulsory license, which means that you don't have to grant it to somebody. If you don't want your music synced to video, you don't have to give them permission. You don't have to give them a license. And when you license them with the ability to do that, you get to ask for money. So it's a little more complicated than just that, because there are actually two licenses that somebody who wants to produce a video with your music has to has to get. They have to get a license from the master owner, and they also have to get a license from whoever owns or manages the copyright to the composition, so the song. This is a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because it's complicated to get a number of different parties to all agree and to get them to agree in a timely way. And typically sync for film, ad, and TV happens very quickly. So there's a lot of pressure to get things turned around fast. And when you've got to reach out to a couple of different publishers, maybe, and a record label, it can be hard to herd all of those cats into one place. But the advantage to that is that every single one of those people has the ability to negotiate and help drive the cost of that sync license up potentially, and everybody benefits when that happens. We'll get more into like the nitty gritty of how you actually monetize that, but for now, suffice it to say, sync licensing is a thing. It's a way to make money on the masters that you control. The last two royalties I want to talk about are not royalties typically, again, that that record labels participate in, but they're important to understand because they are part of running a record label. The public performance is again that most common copyright that most folks are familiar with. That's the one that's collected through SOCAN, goes to songwriters and publishers. And essentially, anytime a song is performed in a commercial environment, whether you play it on stage with your band, somebody else covers your song, it's on the radio, it's on Muzak at a hair salon, film or TV, then the songwriters and publishers are due a royalty from that. But as label owners, unless you scoop the publishing for those songs, then you don't participate in that. Mechanical royalties, on the opposite end of where sync is a non-compulsory license, a mechanical royalty is a compulsory license, meaning that songwriters essentially have to give you a license to reproduce their songs. And a mechanical royalty is earned anytime somebody replicates a sound recording, and then that is also paid to the songwriters and publishers. It does get fairly complicated. Mechanical royalties were coming from a time when all music happened on vinyl, or later cassettes, and all the various mediums, cassettes, 8-tracks, CDs, whatever. And now that we're living in a digital age, those royalties have carried forward to apply to the digital world, but they are just not quite as straightforward. But when you press a CD, every song that is on that CD, you owe the songwriter and the publisher a small royalty for the ability to press that single CD. And that's a statutory rate that is negotiated by the Copyright Board and is different in a couple of different countries. There's rates set in the US and Canada and the UK. So depending on where you press your records, then that's the statutory rate that you have to pay. And you can pay them through the CMRA, which is an organization here in Canada that looks after that, or Harry Fox is the one in the States. We won't go too far into it, but again, suffice it to say, mechanical royalties exist. Every time you duplicate a sound recording, you have to pay it. They also apply to downloads. They also apply to streams. I'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about sort of actually monetizing these royalties, but for now, there they are. Mechanical royalties. There are other revenue streams that are available to record labels, and it sort of depends on how you operate and how you're set up. A big one could be merch sales. So if you partner with your artists to create tote bags, shirts, posters, swag, and you have an agreement that allows you to sell that, you can participate in the revenue for that. And that can be fairly lucrative if you have artists that are selling a lot of merch. If you are responsible as a record label for facilitating a partnership with a brand, which is not as common for early artists, but is at a higher level, then you can also potentially commission on a piece of that, depending on how your deal structure is set up. And the big one for us Canucks here is that there is an opportunity to drive revenue for your projects through grants and funding, through Factor, through council for the arts through your sort of as well as your provincial and your municipal arts councils. There's so much funding available for artists, and a great resource to start with that is your provincial music industry associations. They can be really helpful in sort of steering you in the right direction. I will add to that as a record label, or acting as your own record label too, sort of the challenge is how do you find new streams of revenue for yourself? Part of how we survive as artists, and I think the pandemic has taught us this especially, is that we need to be flexible and we need to be adaptable. We're kind of cockroaches. I swear that after a nuclear apocalypse, the last people that would be left would be artists, because we've been living off rice and beans forever, and we're fairly resilient creatures, I think. And part of that is looking for opportunities where other folks don't see them. So, you should always have an entrepreneurial mindset going and thinking about how else you can find a way to sneak a couple of nickels out of some area of the business that somebody else has missed. If you have any great ideas, by the way, drop them in the chat. Share them with the class. If I'm missing any, I'd love to hear them. And now, for a thrilling segue into distribution methods. I will take a bit of a trip here to talk about distribution methods, because if we are thinking about revenue and royalties, and we're thinking about how to be the most efficient about collecting that river of nickels, making sure you have a good distribution setup is a really important piece of that. And effectively, the way to think about it is there is an inherent trade-off between how much you're going to give up, how much of your revenue you're going to give up for somebody to do the distribution, and how much you need in terms of services. So there's a bit of a gamut here. And on one side, we have what I like to think of as like a bona fide distributor. And then all the way on the other spectrum is a digital aggregator, or sometimes they're called open distribution platforms. So we'll talk about both of those briefly here. Distributors, like the bona fide distributors, would be companies like ADA, Ingrooves, and The Orchard, which are the indie distribution arms of the major labels. There's also companies like Believe, Symphonic. Fontana is a really big one here in Canada. There's a number of record labels here in Canada that also do distribution and partner with these various ones. And they get a little convoluted, because you'll often have a distribution company who actually distributes through Ingrooves, but they work together to provide a bunch of those services. The bona fide distributors are going to handle your digital distribution, and they may or may not handle your physical distribution as well. So they're going to get your CDs, your vinyl, cassettes are coming back. They're going to make sure that those are stocked at Walmart, Amazon, all those massive retailers, as well as your local indie record stores. They're going to make sure your digital music gets sent out to all of your retail partners, your digital service providers, the Spotify's, Apple, Amazon, etc. And along with that, they're likely going to have some sort of marketing and promotion capability. They're going to have a sales team that you can tap into. Those sales teams are going to be supporting your releases, hopefully they should be, by pushing for playlists, by pushing for trade marketing. So making sure if there's opportunities to have your releases on banners on the iTunes store, for example, or part of special promotions at Amazon, that kind of thing. These distributors might have a radio team. They often come with a sync team as well. We talked about sync a little bit earlier. But effectively, they have these extensive support networks that can surround your releases and help you drive them forward. In exchange for that, they're going to take a higher percentage than the digital aggregators on the other end of the spectrum. You can negotiate a variety of different distribution deals. Some things to think about are if you're looking at, for those of you that are looking to put out music for many artists, something that you should be thinking about when you're looking at your distribution agreements is it exclusive? Is it an exclusive distro deal? Meaning that you have to put all of your releases through that one partner, because that may limit you. as Canadian labels, there's a lot of incentive for us to release Canadian music because there's a lot of funding that supports us releasing Canadian music. But if you wanted to put out an American artist, or you wanted to put out an artist in the UK, then there is a potential benefit to have, or to be had, in working with a distributor in those territories, because they're a little more plugged into the opportunities that are available to artists that are living and working there. So if you have a setup that allows you to be flexible and potentially release records in certain territories with one distributor, certain territories with another distributor, though it can be a little more complicated, you can activate different teams in different markets that really help you push very specifically in those territories. The distribution commissions or the fees that they charge for putting out your music vary pretty wildly. And I've seen them go as low as 5% in some cases for back catalog. So your old releases that are sitting there that don't require a lot of attention, some distribution companies will say, we'll put those out for 5%. Bring your back catalog over here, we'll give you a real break. And I've seen distribution fees go as high as 25%, depending on what you're getting in return. A great lawyer will help you negotiate a savvy distribution agreement if that's something you're looking at, and it's worth it to have somebody operating on your behalf, helping you keep those things in mind and helping you get a deal that really fits what you want to do. Distributors. Let's talk about digital aggregators for a second. Also called open distribution platforms. These are companies like CD Baby, DistroKid, TuneCore. There are a mountain of folks that do this. I would say that these are the three that do it most commonly. I've used all three of them for different releases at different times. I like DistroKid. I like the setup. They are the DIY alternative to the big distributors. And though some of them will do, I believe CD Baby does a certain amount of physical distribution as well. Predominantly, these are digital services. So they're sending these to the DSPs for you. You don't have a label rep with a digital aggregator like this. You don't usually have a point of contact or a team that you're meeting with weekly. Whereas with a traditional distributor, you will have a team that you're meeting with regularly, talking about your releases, building marketing plans. These cats are very DIY. You get a login, you have access to a workstation of sorts where you can upload all of your digital assets and service them. The fee structures vary tremendously here. And if you're, again, if we're looking at this through the lens of like a river of nickels, then it's worth spending a little bit of time on being realistic. What do you expect to return in terms of royalties on these releases? And how do you want to structure that? So some of these digital aggregators will be a per release fee, a one-time fee. Maybe it's $50. And that covers the life of the release. They send it out for you and then they report on the royalties. CD Baby takes a commission. I believe it's 9%, or it was for the longest time, something like that. So they're going to take an ongoing cut of all of your sales. Some of them, I believe DistroKid is, once you pay your fee, then you get 100% of the royalties flowed straight through to you. So there's some serious advantage in working with these companies. They're very lean. You don't get a ton in terms of support, but you get to keep all the cheddar, and that may be very worthwhile for you. These digital aggregators may also collect some different royalties for you. They may offer to sign you up to collect your neighboring rights. They may offer to sign you up to work on your publishing. I don't necessarily think that that's the best way to go. There is an efficiency to having a one-stop shop, and if you really hate admin and you're really not down with it, if I'm boring the tears out of you right now and this is just killing you, then maybe that is a good setup for you. I think it's good to be realistic about your appetite for this kind of like nerdy admin stuff. So they will offer to do that for you. Whether you take them up on it, you may want to think about it. We'll get through some different options on how to collect these things yourself, and then you can decide whether that sounds like the workflow that makes sense to you. Enough of that. Enough about that. Blah, 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 Dave. Yakety yak. Let's get paid. Oh, Q&A. Oh, sorry, I'm not really good at this Zoom stuff. This is my first time sort of presenting, and I realized that I missed a question here from anonymous attendee. The question is, where does the label register the master royalty or the publishing royalty? Like, is there a SOCAN for the master? Absolutely, and I'm actually going to talk about that right now. So, very timely question. Let's get into it. So let's talk. We have this understanding now. We know what record labels are. We know what rights and royalties are, or at least I've talked about them, and I hope I haven't confused you. Now we're going to talk about how do you monetize them, how do you actually get paid. This is the easiest one. Streaming royalties, downloads, and physical sales. So these will all go through your distributor or your aggregator. They're going to collect them directly from the DSPs. They're going to collect them directly from retailers. So whether that's Amazon, Walmart, AEC, Sunrise, whatever, indie record sales. And they're going to flow them through to you. They're going to flow them through to you with detailed statements. Now, the other side to all of this madness is that at some point, once you've collected all this money, you have to pay the artists. Now, if you're acting as your own record label, much easier. You just get to keep everything. If you're just putting out your own music, good for you. Just collect all the dough, stick it under your mattress, buy a Tesla. But if you have other artists that you need to pay, then you really need to be careful with these detailed statements. You need to collect them. You need to know where they are, and then you need to be able to break them out so you can figure out what you owe your artists and for which tracks, and depending on the kind of record deals that you have. Maybe I'll touch on that. If we have enough time, I'll sort of go through that a little bit at the very end, at least how we've managed to solve that problem. The big one, the neighboring rights dilemma. How do you collect neighboring rights as a master owner, whether that's an independent artist or that's a record label? And this will answer your question, anonymous attendee. You need to register your recordings with a CMO, and in Canada, we have a number of options for that. CMO stands for Collective Management Organization, and that's effectively, SOCAN is to collecting public performance rights what CMOs are to neighboring rights. So SOCAN is your PRO, collects your songwriting royalties. In Canada, we have two organizations that you can choose to register with that will collect your neighboring rights for you in Canada and elsewhere. They are Resound, and they are also Connect Music. They're very similar, but there are some subtle differences. It's worth spending a bit of time navigating that for yourself, but effectively they do the same job. They collect those neighboring rights for you. They have reciprocal agreements with countries around the world. So Connect Music, I believe, has more of those reciprocal agreements. So they have reciprocal agreements with, like, I want to say it's like 30 something countries around the world, where Resound, I believe, has like 15. And that number is always changing. So you've got this option. Where do you go? Well, you can go to either one, but I'm going to suggest you a couple of different setups, because if you remember, we talked about Sound Exchange and we talked about the Rome Convention and how not everybody plays nice with the US. It's really important for you as a right owner to be set up to collect your neighboring rights in the US, because Sound Exchange can pay really, really well. Why do they pay really, really well? Because they collect satellite radio royalties. So they collect royalties on the neighboring rights on satellite radio, which can be very, very lucrative. We are very fortunate in Canada. We have a handful of Sirius XM stations that, though it's an American company, though that those royalties flow through Sound Exchange in the US, they are programmed here in Canada. And so they have an overwhelming amount of Canadian content compared to all of the songs that they play. Every time your song gets spun on Sirius XM, very, very approximately 50 USD is generated in terms of royalties. So if you're getting paid If you're getting spun 4 times a day on SiriusXM, that's $200 a day. That's split evenly between the performers on the sound recording and the label. But you can see how an ad to SiriusXM can become very lucrative very quickly. And so being set up to collect it efficiently is worth your while. Again, if you have the capacity, appetite for admin, you need to be a bit of a masochist in that department in order to want to do it. But so I'm going to suggest a couple of different scenarios. If you are admin adverse, if you don't enjoy metadata and spreadsheets, what I recommend is register yourself with either Connect Music or Resound and register your catalog of sound recordings there with them. Allow them to collect in all the territories that they can, and be done with it. And they will report to you, and they're very good at what they do. Problem solved. If you don't mind a little bit of admin heavy lifting, you can register your catalog twice. Once with either Connect Music or Resound, and then once directly with Sound Exchange. I know some people prefer to deal directly with Sound Exchange worldwide because they have great customer service. Their portal is really slick. They work really quick. There's a lot of reasons why people enjoy working with them, but there is one big reason why you don't want to be a one-stop shop with Sound Exchange, because you can go direct to Sound Exchange and they will connect your Canadian neighboring rights for you as well. They can do the whole pie, but because they didn't sign that Rome Convention, not everybody in the world will flow through all types of royalties to them. So for example, if you get on the radio in Germany and Sound Exchange is collecting all your royalties, not all of those German royalties are going to flow through back to you because Germany stands in solidarity with the other members of the Rome Convention. Oh, suffice it to say, what I suggest you do is have Sound Exchange collect directly for you in the US and have Resound or Connect collect for you worldwide and ask them to carve out the US. You can do that with an email. In Connect, there's actually Connect Music has a little drop down. You can go in there and say, collect everywhere except for the US. And then tick, boom, you're done. It does require you to go in and register your catalog separately. So you got to do it once with Connect, once with Sound Exchange. It's a bit of a step, but you save the commissions that the CMOs will charge to collect in other territories. I believe Resound charges 10% to collect those royalties, which is pretty hefty. Connect Music doesn't, but they will charge their commission on top of that. So they have a 4% commission for collecting those rights. So either way, you kind of get double dinged if you let them do the heavy lifting, and there can be so much money coming out of Sound Exchange in the US that it is definitely worth your time if you have the appetite for it. I'm going to move on to sync licensing, which we talked about mostly, but I want to talk about specifically how you might monetize that. So there's a couple of different ways. Like, I don't think the topic of this presentation is necessarily how to drive syncs or how to drive streaming. That's probably a marketing or promotion conversation. I really want to talk about how do you make sure you get paid for these things. So with that, there's really kind of two ways of getting syncs: on your own or through a sync team. Now, you may remember we were talking about distributors. Sometimes your distributors will have a sync team that's actively pushing to try and get your music and film and TV and ads, video games, whatever. You can also go and hire a third-party company to do something like that. Those companies are examples of that would be like a Terrorbird, which is a great indie company that does all kinds of things, but they're really good at sync licensing. Bank Robbers, another really reputable sync licensing team. You can hire these folks to represent your catalog as a label, or just your music as an independent artist. If they like it, they'll take it on, and they work for a percentage. In my opinion, that's a great way to work because those people are really, really good at what they do, and they're incentivized. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. And they're not going to take on your catalog if they don't feel like they have a chance of landing something with it. So finding a good sync team is a great way to drive that revenue. The other option is for you to do it yourself by speaking to music supervisors or friends that are making movies. Indie producers or documentaries are always looking for great music. And if you have those connections, you can work with those people to get your songs synced up. We talked about the different licenses that are required. One for the, Russell asks, what are the names of the two sync teams? I really like Terrorbird. We've worked with them on a couple of different projects. They work for Begonia and Royal Canoe for us, and they do a fantastic job. And I also really like Bank Robber. So yeah, Bank Robber and Terrorbird. One thing to talk about when you're looking at negotiating sync licenses is a concept called most favored nations. So if you remember, they're complicated because we've got a bunch of people that are coming in very quickly to negotiate a fee, all these different rights holders. So if you have multiple songwriters on a track with multiple publishers, then you've got all these different people that are trying to drive the cost up. It's important that while you're negotiating those contracts, you include a clause, a most favored nations clause, which effectively means that whoever drives the best deal for the sync, everybody gets the same deal. So I'll give you an example. One example is, we had a sync come in for X. It was X. It was a hefty fee, but it was X for one song. And another partner that was involved in that negotiation was able to drive it up by a significant portion. So they were able to get the pricing because we had a deal that was most favored nations. That means that everybody rises to that level. Everybody comes out on top. If you don't include that clause, there's a potential that you end up shortchanged and somebody's getting paid more for the same amount of work. You don't want that. So most favored nations, leave that in your brain somewhere. And hopefully that helps you out. Andrew Karras, Actor Racks. Oh, fantastic. Well, now I'm all sheepish because you definitely know more than I do about this stuff. Andrew has a question. Hi, David. Really enjoying this, especially the bias. Thanks. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about your experience with data and how to best keep track of your data to ensure that you can maximize your revenue via all these rights and rev streams. Any tips or suggestions from your experience? I'm so glad you asked. Look at my next slide. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer, and your metadata nice and tidy. This is for the geeks in the room, my people. All of this matters very little if you don't know what your metadata is for your catalog, for all the songs that you're putting out. Clean metadata is super important to get paid because it allows all of these myriad organizations, the CMOs all over the world, the distributors and the aggregators, other record labels, all these folks that are interacting with this music. Hi, Roz. Hey, I got friends in the chat. This is great. Your metadata allows all of these people to trace this stuff back to you. It also, if it's done correctly, allows you to potentially see a couple of new opportunities. So metadata is really, really critical. And I recommend that everybody who's serious about putting out your own music, whether it's an independent artist, you want to start your own record label, you are a record label, at minimum, you have a really robust spreadsheet that has tons of information for every track. I should have made a slide for this. I didn't, because I don't know. Why didn't I do it? That was a mistake. Did I have a list of all the different things I wanted to see on there? Oh, I lost it. You want to keep track of things like the title, the subtitle, the featured artist, and the primary artist. You want to know what language the lyrics are in. You want to have those lyrics on hand. You want to know what the country of fixation was. So in what country was that recorded? Where's the master made? That's important information for neighboring rights. What year was it made? Are you the exclusive licensee? Are you the original owner? What was the country of first release? Who's the record label? How long is the track? These are all the sort of various things that you're going to want to know as you upload these things. So a spreadsheet at minimum is going to be really crucial because you need, every time you register this stuff with these neighboring rights organizations, they want to see all this information. And if you have it at your fingertips, that can be really easy. It's a question of copying and pasting it into their spreadsheets. You're off to the races. And if you don't have it, there's no guarantee that this money is going to find its way back to you. You really kind of have to set yourself up for it. When we started the label, we started off with a spreadsheet, and very quickly it got wildly out of hand. And I realized that wasn't tenable for us. We're just over 90 releases in the last 2 years. And so my spreadsheet was a disaster. I tried a bunch of different catalog management software for record labels and publishing companies. And I landed on one that I really like and would recommend to anyone, whether you're just managing your own software or managing your own catalog as an independent artist and you've got a handful of releases, or if you're looking at starting your own label. It's called Repertoire, R-E-P-R-T, I'll type it out here, R-E-P-R-T-O-I-R. They spell it funny. They're based in Belgium. It's inexpensive, relatively inexpensive software. They charge you based on how much you use. And they're, yeah, I really like it. It's really slick. It's really intuitive. Oh, it didn't show up on the chat. My bad. Well, I'll just spell it out. I'm really kind of Zoom dumb. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. Hosts and participants. Yeah, I probably am. Oh, look at that. Somebody's got my back. Okay. I'm a geek, but I'm just not geeky enough, I guess. So that's kind of it for me. That was what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to touch on some of these rights and royalties, some of my anecdotal experience with trying to collect them all, and hopefully set you guys up in a position to at least have a bit of an idea where to look. I am very happy to chat about this stuff at any time with anybody. So I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and don't feel shy to reach out with your questions about this kind of stuff, because I genuinely enjoy it, and I really get a kick out of helping people find some pennies here and there. We have like 3 minutes. If you have any questions, please fire them away. What type of font are you using? It's great. Hey, thanks. My wife designed these slides for me. My wife, Roberta, is a graphic designer, and she gave me a template to use. I have no idea what the font is, but it is really nice, isn't it? Thanks for saying so. Oh, I hear somebody.
Well, that's me, David.
Hi, Joel.
The voice of FMO. It looks like you explained things so well that people don't have any final questions. They're just sending you kudos. Just kudos in the chat. That's lovely.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.